this lesson, I'm going to be looking at fractions as a percent. Example 1 says, a survey was taken that asked participants whether or not they were happy or unhappy with their job. An overall score was given. 300 of the participants were unhappy, while 700 of the participants were happy. Give a part-to-whole fraction for comparing happy participants to unhappy participants. Okay, let's pause there. 7 over 1,000. That is 70 over 100 divided by 10, or 70%. For unhappy, that's 300 over 1,000. We can divide by 10 and get 30 over 100, or 30%. Remember, percentages are out of 100, so if we just make fractions out of 100, we're in good shape. Now let's make what I call a double number line to represent this as well. Put the percents on the top number line and the participants on the bottom number line. They both start at 0, and they both make it to their whole, 100% or 1,000 participants. So let's go ahead and divide this up into something that goes into both of them. So we're going to divide it up into tens. Alright, so we start with 10%. We'll fill in here some of these 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. And then let's find the corresponding amounts for participants. To do that, think about from 100 to 1,000, that's 1/10. So to go from 1,000 down to that first line, we have to take 1/10 of that, so that's going to be 100. And so 200, 400, 600, and 800 there. So this would also show how many participants match up with various things. So happy were 700, or 70%, as shown on that line there. And then the unhappy will make them red, because they're kind of angry, right here. So that's 30%, or 300. Exercise 1 is another visual for showing percentages and fractions. So Renata claims that 80% of she got 80% correct, which she says is 4/5 of the problems. So there's 20 squares this way and 5 rows this way, so there are 100 squares. So I'm going to number those 1 through 5. So there's a total of 80 shaded squares out of 100 squares. So that does kind of confirm our 80%. So yes, we think Renata is correct. So you can do this with, starting with 4/5 and see how can we make that into 80 out of 100. Well, we can multiply by 10 over 10 and then by 2 over 2. And we see 80 over 100. Yeah, that makes sense. It is 80%. So what else could we do to help Renata? We could definitely add some information to the picture, like each row is 20%, so 20%, 40%, 60, 80, and 100%. Or you could get super detailed and said that every single square is 1%. There's 80 squares of 1%, so there's 80%. So adding more details to our picture could really emphasize the connection between this picture and our percents. All right, here our tape diagram is given. And it says 80% is what fraction of the whole. So 80% here matches up with 4, but 4 is not our answer because 4 is not the whole. Since 5 is matched up with 100 here, 5 is our whole, so we have 4 out of 5. Okay, so 4 out of 5 is our 80%. Similarly, 1/5, that 1 there represents 1/5. So that 1 does match up with the 20%, and so that's what 1/5 over a whole is 20%. We can do it with fractions. We say 1/5 times 10 over 10 is 10 over 50, times 2 over 2 is 20 over 100, so 20 over 100, 20%. Okay, so 50%, it's not on our drawing, but we can kind of add in there in the middle. It's halfway between 40 and 60%. So halfway between 2 and 3 is 2.5. So we could also think about 50%, 50 out of 100. We could divide by 10 over 10 to get 5 over 10, and then we have to divide by 2 to get 2.5. So any way you slice it, 2.5 is 50% of the whole quantity for this one. Now it says 1 is what percent of the whole quantity. Now don't confuse this with 1 on the double number line. See, look, when we have 1/5, that was 1 on the number line. This one is referring to a whole, 5/5. So 5/5, 1, that's going to be 100% in our picture here. Okay, so Maria completed 3/4 of her work today, so let's go ahead and make another double number line to represent this. Alright, so we will have percents on the top, and we'll have parts of her workday that she went through. Alright, so we'll put our wholes here, 100%, and since we're out of fourths, we'll call that 4 as our whole. So we'll split this up into just fourths. So 25%, 50%, 75%, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see that 3/4 goes with 75%. What percent of her workday does she have left? Well, that's 1 out of 25. So 25% is 1 out of 4. So 25% of her workday is left. So how does this help? Well, we kind of see everything is divided into fourths. 100 is divided into fourths, and our whole is divided into fourths. So we can see clearly that 3/4 is 75% and 1/4 is 25%. Okay, we're converting between fraction decimals and percentages. So 1/8, let's convert that into something that ends with like zeros out of like a 10, out of 100, out of 1,000. That's easy to convert into the decimal numbers. So it doesn't go into 10, it doesn't go into 100, but it does go into 1,000 if we multiply by 125. So multiply the bottom by 125, and if we do that, we have to multiply the top by 125. So if we multiply the top by 125, of course we get 125. So that just means 125 thousandths, and that's how we write it as a decimal, 125 thousandths. So if we want a percent, we talked about this before, we just move the decimal 2 places to the right, so that gives us 12.5%. For 0.35, we'll start off as 35 out of 100 because of the place value. So we can divide by 5 on top and bottom and get 7 out of 20. And again, we can move the decimal 2 places to the right to get 35%. For 84.5%, we can start by moving the decimal 2 to the left. We're kind of going in reverse now to get that the decimal is 0.845. Well, 0.845 means 845 over 1,000. We can divide both numerator and denominator by 5, and we get 169 over 200 as our simplified fraction. 0.325, well, we'll start with 325 over 1,000, and we can divide numerator and denominator both by 25 to get 13 over 40 as our reduced fraction. 2 over 25, well, we're going to get something out of 100, so we can multiply by 4 on top and bottom to get 8 out of 100. And 8 out of 100, careful, make sure it's 0.08, not 0.8. That's 8 in the 100th place, not in the 10th place. It's 8 over 100, not 8 over 10. And so that's 8%. Oops, realized we forgot this one over here. Let's go back. Remember, we're moving the decimal 2 to the right, so we get that is 32.5%.